How are we advancing slides? Just see next slide.
Morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Awesome. I appreciate everybody coming out and joining us this morning. My role here, I want to lay a little bit of a lay of the land, so to speak, and we'll talk about a little bit of the process that got us to this point, and then I'll turn it over to some of the other presenters this morning. A little bit of housekeeping, obviously. In the hallway bathrooms, you'll find them if you need them. Feel free to help yourself. As far as the program this morning, the organization of our meeting, we're going to go through a presentation up on the screen. I'm going to go through a few different speakers, talk about some of the major points of the plan and all the work that has come to at this point. We're not going to do any questions during the presentation this morning because we want to make sure that we respect the time and we get through it as efficiently as possible. But after the program is delivered and the presentation is delivered, we're going to have you have obviously access to all of these presentation boards around the room. And this is where essentially the rubber is hitting the road. This gives a lot more of the information that we're going to talk about up here this morning. Many of the presenters, trustees, Dana, Holly, a lot of folks will be around the room to answer questions at that point. And we do want your feedback. You'll see sticky notes, you'll see markers, pins on the easels around the room. So we want to hear that feedback. We want to get those notes to take back to the process. In addition to that, you guys will have to bear with me. I asked Holly to put some talking points together for me on the presentation. She did a thorough job with that. So I've got them here in front of me as we go through it. So next slide, please. One more. So I want to go through just a little bit of a timeline as to how we've got here. I know many of you in the room have been along with us during this process over the previous number of years. So we're going to just kind of take it of laying the groundwork for everything. But essentially, this all started back in 2021 with the comprehensive plan. Adopted that at the end of 2021. Shortly after that, we got the Intel announcement in January of 2022, and I think that sparked really a lot of concern, but a lot more action and activity over how we can best protect the townships, how we can best be prepared for that development as it comes through. After that, the quick strategy guide was the result of a lot of that forethought and action that was adopted in March of 2023. Following that, the overlay district projects that we've still been working on in some way, shape, or form recently, but that covered 23, 24 as we brought on those overlay districts. In there, the sewer coming in from the southwest corner really started to get attention. Now, in my opinion, Intel really just did us a favor to get us a little bit better educated, to get us a little bit more prepared on what we need to do to plan for a development like this. The sewer is really what will ignite that development in the Harlem Township. And that is going to be done during the next 4 years. 27, 28, we're going to start to see the completion of that. We're going to start seeing things start to tap into the sewer. Land transactions, aka land being purchased, folks having interest in development in Harlem Township has occurred throughout this time. You know, some even going further back than the 2020s. And so that is a big factor in what we're doing and how we approach this. Again, referencing the sewer. You know, that sewer coming into the southwest corner gives the potential to a much more considerable development than a septic system alone would. And so folks that may have purchased property 20 years ago or more did so with an understanding that in the future they might be able to develop that land to a certain extent. We have to make sure that we can steward that development in the right way, because if we prevent that potential development, the township faces legal challenge. Land rights, legal challenges that are very difficult to overcome. And so we might not be able to just stop the development altogether, but we can control it. And that's what we have been focused on, especially over the last couple of years, really digging into and understanding how we do that to the best of our abilities. Some of the main ways that we have done that is really digging into the potential partnerships with some of our neighbors. You know, that was a lot of feedback that I personally remember hearing at the beginning of 2024, working with some of the folks like Delina, like Genoa, like Trent, you know, making sure that we're doing the best that we can. Some of these partnerships are really some of the most exciting, the biggest developments that we have working right now that are going to be a huge part of protecting our township. Next slide. So this is the sewer expansion that we were talking about. The city of Columbus is extending a 72-inch trunk line to the township's southwest border. Delaware County will be responsible for the sewers into Harlem Township. Delaware County contracted with a professional engineering firm to study 6 different potential alignments, looking at various factors. Some of those factors being the geotechnical analysis, the construction techniques, construction costs, environmental impacts, operation and maintenance, and then easement operations. The county is moving forward with the 6th alternative and expects 30% of plan to be completed by February of 2026. I get that pretty much right? The pink line is what we're referencing. So you can see the pink line right there. The last alternative that the engineers came up with is the one that they decided to go through with. So you can see that coming in and then across the southern end of the township.
What roads are those?
And, yeah, a little bit hard, but essentially, you know, where the star is right there, you're looking at just north of Fancher Road along the western side of State Route 605. So that is the southern side of the township. And this is on one of the maps around, Holly?
Yeah.
Over here in the corner.
The north side, north of the properties that front on Fancher.
North of the properties that front on Fancher, yes. But again, this is a map that is in clear detail that you'll see in the back of the room. Next slide, please. So talking about fresh water. So Delco is the water provider in Harlem Township, and they currently have a water line that runs under Hoover Reservoir. But development pressures, the need for more water, is causing a need for infrastructure investment. There, we actually had Delco at a trustee meeting recently talking about some of their plans and some of their ideas as far as how to bring additional water into the township. They're studying how to establish additional connectivity across Hoover Reservoir via Sunbury Road into Harlem Township with a 24-inch line from Genoa. A second water tank was recently constructed. I'm sure everybody has probably seen that right at Center Village. And the additional tank is a 750,000 gallon capacity, in addition to the first one, which was 250,000 gallons. So the township now has a 1 million gallon capacity, which is substantial, I would say, for a township and a population of our size. The red dotted line in the map above me represents the potential water line expansion service in the southeast corner of the township. And it could be either Delco or the city of Columbus, pending further study, negotiation, onto what makes the most sense for that. Next slide, please. Talking about electric, something near and dear to my corner of the township, and we've already seen the helicopters running these new power lines through. One of the 2 new huge power lines being constructed through the township. Both are connecting to the Vassal Green substation on the outskirts of Sunbury. Vassal Green Line is the initial phase of the construction through the northeast portion of the township. 150-foot tall transmission towers, 150-foot wide easement corridor. Construction goes through 2026 on the Vassal Green Line, and the Vassal Curley's Line, which will impact a little bit more of the township, is running northwest to southeast, and construction on that takes place starting in 26, going through 2027. Next slide, please. So, obviously considering, the impacts that growth can bring to some of our existing infrastructure departments, when we look at fire, safety, and our emergency services, there are a handful of significant challenges to consider in some of these. Budget constraints, recruitment difficulties, and increased demand for services. I don't think we have Chief O'Brien or Assistant Chief McKean here this morning, but I will take any opportunity to tout on our fire department. You have a nationally recognized fire department in this township. Recently we just approved a new firefighter EMT contract with Chief's help. And we are a recruiter of choice in the area for experienced firefighters, EMTs, and emergency personnel. We have officers in other departments that are willing to take a step down in their career to come and work in Harlem Township. And so we should all be very thankful, very grateful for some of the folks that we have working in our emergency services. But in addition to that, the facilities, the equipment are also factors to consider: age and mileage of the vehicles, maintenance costs, compliance and safety standards, performance and capabilities, additional budget funding items, community demand and technology advances. The emergency apparatus industry was one of the most impacted by the post-COVID supply chain law. I'm not sure how many folks are aware of that, and John would love to speak to that at some point. But this is a huge impact to many smaller municipalities, and so being able to anticipate that demand on what that equipment costs and that impact is also a huge factor here. But then as we look at the growth of the township, additional headcount, additional services, additional infrastructure for fire, all of these things are stuff that we have to take into consideration. Going back to some of the points that we've made recently in Board of Trustee meetings, we are looking for every way to prevent the existing residents from paying for that growth, right? And these are the economic vehicles that we've talked about with neighboring communities, with development infrastructure, all of those items on our mind. Next slide, please. Everybody's favorite topic, roundabouts. So if they weren't popular already, they're going to continue to do so. There are 3 roundabouts that are proposed along County Line Road, at the intersection of Fancher, at the intersection of Center Village, and at the intersection of 37. Fancher and Center Village Road and County Line Road, those are funded through a program called the Silicon Heartland Program. County Line Road will also be widened to 11-foot lanes with 2-foot paved shoulders with 2-foot graded shoulders. East-west connections are important, needed. The Delaware County Engineer's Office does not have any east-west connectors planned. These connections will be developer-driven, so as the developers continue to come in, as property continues to be developed, those topics will be discussed then. The township currently has 2 road maintenance employees. Additional staff and equipment will be needed as the township grows. And so I know that for many of us, the sort of litmus test as to whether or not a township is functioning property is, do my township roads get plowed when it snows? And does the grass at the cemetery get cut? And our 2 guys are doing a pretty good job with that, but as the population grows, as more roads need to be plowed, we will need more folks to do that. So these are all things that we have also taken into consideration. Next slide, please. Surrounding communities. So this is probably one of my favorite topics, just a testament to what municipalities can do if they just work together and have the conversations. The discussions with Harlem and Columbus are ongoing, and probably one of the most impactful parts here. I know that we have worked with Columbus in a few different areas of the township, and I guess we still are. But I want to point out that Columbus did us a favor. And John, I think, can speak to the time frame a lot on this a little bit better, but Columbus historically had always owned the property upon which Hoover Reservoir sits. It was not a part of the city of Columbus, but Columbus always owned that property. There were attempts made from some neighboring municipalities to find a path of annexation into Harlem Township. Those paths included talking to some of the residents and property owners here. Those paths included asking Columbus, hey, would you annex part of your land so that we can get over towards Harlem Township? And so Columbus, due to conversations that we had already had with them, decided, hey, I think maybe we should take a different approach on this. And so that's one of the things that kicked off Columbus's desire to annex property that they already owned. Now, Columbus is very much interested in protecting their water source, of which Hoover Reservoir is one of the biggest. I think we can all appreciate that. But as they annexed the Hoover Reservoir property that was historically Glendon Township, one of the things that they essentially did was prevent an avenue of annexation into another neighboring municipality. And that was a huge benefit for us, because other than partnering with someone larger and more powerful, we don't really have a defense for that. I should also say that Columbus has continued working on that annexation of Hoover further north, working with our neighbors in Genoa Township, developing a very well thought out plan as far as the annexation of that property that includes a non-annexation agreement. So Columbus has a proven track record in our little slice of central Ohio of working with the townships to help do what is best for the townships. And we are very much looking forward to continue that working relationship as long as we can. Conversations have also begun with New Albany about temporary sewer diversion through Harlem Township. Asking for a non-annexation agreement from New Albany would also be included in this plan. Galena and the township are also discussing the extension of sewers from the village to the townships to the township in the northwest corner, which would be coupled with a CEDA and a JED. That also would include a non-annexation agreement. And the thought there is, recently, a large portion of Trenton Township was annexed into Sunbury. And I'm sure most of you have probably seen the news about, I think it's Amazon that's going to build a huge data center off of Vance Valley Road. That is our backyard. Those big developments bring development with them. And should somebody want to do some development in Harlem Township in that corner, we want to make sure that we can provide the infrastructure necessary to those subsequent industries so that they don't feel the need to also annex into Sudbury. And so being able to work with Galena, who actually has their own sewer infrastructure, accomplishes that. We develop a relationship with Galena in the northwest corner. We build some sewer infrastructure into the northwest corner of Harlem Township. We have a non-annexation agreement that benefits both sides, and we protect Harlem Township from the threats of annexation, which again has been our goal for the last 2 years, and stretching even further than that. Next slide, please. And so that essentially paints the picture that brings us up until this point. We have assessed the threats, if we want to look at them that way. We've looked at all the factors that work against us, but what we have realized is that we have some tools. We have some strength and we have some power here in Harlem Township. We can essentially be in control of our own destiny. We don't have to just sit back and watch it happen to us. And so today, as we present this plan, I believe that this is a culmination of all of that hard work. Going back to 21, even the years prior, working on the zoning, working on everything that's involved in this, we are getting to a point where we are really raising the bar on how a township can operate and control the development that is inevitable. I think there are many of us that would love to be able to say that the view outside our kitchen window is not going to change, and we want to prevent that as much as possible. I will be the first one to tell you that that is not possible. We cannot prevent the view from changing, but we absolutely can control what it looks like. 100%. We can control it. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Chris. Come on.
Thank you. So I am Chris Truex. I just want to make sure everyone can hear me. So I'm Chris Truex. I'm one of the steering committee members, And first, just want to, a few thank you and recognitions. One, to the trustees. It's from the whole steering committee for that opportunity to serve the community and be part of this process. It's an honor and something that we took well. Second, I want to recognize Maureen Snowden. She is not able to be here today. Maureen has got a family obligation, and so I get to be Plan B. But she's excellent president of our group, keeping us on task, working with Holly and Crossroads on our agendas and things like that, and keeping us moving in the right direction. And then third, just Holly, their backup, their support for our group with Crossroads has been an excellent step forward. And so you can see behind me, 7 members. We were blindly chosen, but it was a good diverse representation of our community. We had, from a background perspective, we had some IT people, we had some first responders, we had some real estate folks on our group, so kind of a good representation of different perspectives. And then the second part, if you looked at where we lived, it was one of the first things somebody did, it was a good representation of the township, of the area of which we were. And so, it was a good group, and we were able to work ourselves forward. We started in the winter, and if you can go to the next slide. Our purpose was to provide collaborative guidance from a resident's perspective into the process. So as we're looking at our priorities, as we're looking at the initiatives that we're identifying as our opportunities and our recommendations in the strategic plan, it was our responsibility to vet these things in conversations with some feedback from groups like this would be one, but also some meetings that were happening in the township's perspective on our growth and on our future. And so bringing those inputs in and understanding the impact of regional and county work and the reports and the works of that. And then also, like I said, the community meetings here. So we had the 10 monthly meetings, so we met once a month. And we had lots of homework, which was great. Everyone loves homework. And then, kind of serve as a community liaison. We'll go through a couple of the projects of which we led as parts of the process, and then evaluate the data and information in order to guide those processes. And so, as we talk about homework, we can go to the next slide. One of the homeworks we had was we all did these field trips. So around Ohio, we actually had one where we went outside of Ohio, where Dutch Holland went to Indiana to talk to different communities to kind of see what they have gone through. So, it was an opportunity for us to understand where they started, understand their vision, understand how they plan to get there, kind of where they're at in that process and what they've learned. And we brought those learnings back from these communities. Some of them were unique communities, some of them were niche communities, just some wild ideas, give the other adjective to that. But then also, like communities like ours, started as a very rural-esque community, strong passion to stay rural, but understanding that growth is inevitable, and how do they deal with that? And so that was a part of the inputs that we had into that process. So if we can go to the next slide, please. It's kind of hard, you can't see that. On the next slide, but that's okay. So input-wise, we've had these community meetings. You can see we started out really strong in the winter as baseball games and work around the yard and other stuff came about. Our attendance declined, but we had other modes of getting input and feedback from the community. But the community meetings were a major source of input that we considered when we were working through our activities. The second were soup sessions. Soup sessions were an opportunity for us as steering committee members to talk to people around us and get their input on some of the things that we're doing. Where do they see the community? Where do they see it going? What do they want? What don't they want? And that was part of the input. And then third, the trustees have held special meetings to review the draft strategic plan as we've worked ourselves through that process. And so we reviewed some of the chapters, some of the findings, and there were excellent feedback that came. Some of that feedback guided some changes in the draft. And so that's the way it's supposed to work, is to the degree that we've got an opportunity to give a voice, listen to the voice, feedback is a gift, and understand the impact of that feedback as we work ourselves through the process. And so, in closing, I'd just say I feel very good that it was an inclusive process. You could always be more inclusive, right? But we did what we could from a macro to a micro level to get feedback into the process, and then use thoughtful guidance in our critical thinking in order to come up with those initiatives. And again, it wasn't just us, right? We're just an input into the process. We're providing guidance into the development of that strategic plan. But I feel good that we were open, that we were transparent on the direction we were going, and we listened to those inputs in order to do what we can to develop that strategic plan. Now, something may happen Monday morning that's going to cause, there might be feedback from this group, why we're here, right? That can help us continue to craft, to go from draft to final. But then something can come up, as active as Columbus is, and as attractive as Harlem Township is, that we will need to consider then that next step as we continue to have that working document of a strategic plan in order to do what's best. As Adam put it, to use our partnerships and use the tools that we have in order to preserve Harlem Township for the vision that we have. So to that, I'll hand it over to Trustee John Trainer. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. My role this morning is to review the 5 strategic priorities. These are the priorities that the community has identified as the lenses or the thought trajectories that should guide the current Board of Trustees and any future Board of Trustees as the township continues to develop. As my children were growing up, and perhaps as your children were growing up, you would ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they would come up with a list. You probably didn't ask them, what don't you want to be when you grow up? For many years, Harlem Township looked at the community and the growth around them, and our mindset was kind of, I don't want to be that. And so for many years, in a lot of our planning, we took on kind of a defensive posture. We wanted strong borders to keep that outside. The whole purpose of the strategic planning process is to help us as a community articulate what do we want to be. If we were to parachute into Harlem Township in the year 2050, what do we want to see? What is the culture that should develop? What is the aesthetic that we want to see maintained? What are the values that we want to see that community grasping and being identified by? And so this entire planning process over the last several months has been future in its orientation. And we've asked our residents to help us think about who we want to be. I call it aspirational thinking versus defensive thinking. And it is by its very nature much more difficult in its process. In our very first strategic priority that you see above, there are words like distinct, connected, and rooted. We wrestled with other words like rural, or exurb, or suburban. And ultimately, through the help of Crossroads and through the help of our steering committee, came up with, I think, a set of words that are actually better. We want to be a distinct community. We want to have an identity that is not New Albany, that's not Westerville, that's not Sunbury, that's not Johnstown. It is Harlem Township. We want to be a community that is connected. Well, this is a far more difficult challenge, and it's one that I will address as we walk down this set of priorities. And we want to be rooted. In 1810, 35 families composed the population of Harlem Township. In 2025, there are 5,000 people that compose the population of Harlem Township. The things that held that community together in 1810 are not the things that hold us together in 2025. And in fact, for this population to be united around common interests and goals is far more difficult today than it was in 1815. And that's something that we'll talk about. But we want to be rooted in our history. That is, are there values that our ancestors had that we can grasp a hold of, articulate, and make concrete as the township develops? Next slide. We want to have intentional growth and development. Development is not a word that we are necessarily comfortable with. But development is not a bad word. We want to see our kids develop. We want to see our work develop. And we might associate that with maturity. The township has reached a point in its history where we are going to develop over the course of the next decade or two in a particular way that we haven't to this point. Will development happen to us, or will development happen with us? One of the messages that we've heard from our neighboring communities is that we actually have incredible power, and I use that word carefully, it's not a bad word, over the kind of development that occurs in Harlem Township. We as a community get to define them, and then we get to partner with outside entities that want to build a relationship with us and align with our strategic priorities so that they become a part of our community. Not strangers and aliens that build walls in our community, but folks that come in and become a part of who we are. Next slide. Healthy relationships. This is key. Think back into the spring of 2024. And it's not a pleasant thought if you think about the internal relationships that existed within the community. I was coming off active duty in April of 24. I attended a township trustee meeting that was unlike any trustee meeting I'd ever encountered in the past, and watched trustees commit what I would call political suicide before my very eyes. There was an element of distrust that had developed between residents and leadership that needed to be overcome. Over the last several months, the trustee board has worked diligently to build trusting relationships with the community. Open communication builds trusting relationships. Transparency builds trusting relationships. And we are absolutely committed to maintaining these lines of communication and transparency as we move forward in this process, even if it costs us political capital. It's worth it. And we value our residents and this relationship that we've worked hard to maintain. Externally, Harlem Township for many years kind of had the attitude, and it wasn't a bad one, don't call us, we'll call you. And so we weren't that interested in knowing what was happening up in Delaware County. We didn't really worry about what was happening in New Albany or Columbus or Westerville, only we didn't want it to happen to us. And we could exist peacefully in our own little neck of the woods. In fact, I view this township as a remarkable anomaly in the development around Central Ohio. When I first encountered the leadership in Westerville and talked with them, I heard three things. Columbus is bad, you are powerless, and we want to be your new BFF. And what I discovered was that all three of those were untrue. As we began meeting with Columbus in October of 24, we understood that their strategic priorities and our strategic priorities actually aligned. We were looking for autonomy. We wanted to maintain our geographical integrity in a 5-by-5 square mile area. No encroachment, no annexation. We discovered that Columbus wasn't interested in annexing, that they didn't want to extend services, and that they wanted to understand who we are and support the strategic planning process upon which we are embarked. We learned that New Albany carries much the same in terms of their understanding. They are very interested in a well-planned community to their north. They don't want Harlem Township to be New Albany. They understand this is our own unique community, but they want to see a well-planned, intentional community to their north, and are willing to support that. And so I think that within the next 6 months, we'll see a tripartite agreement, a CETA agreement between Columbus and New Albany and Harlem Township that protects our southern tier and establishes a relationship with key partners that help us economically as we plan for our future. Harlem Township has been the initiating entity into a group of neighbors that meet in the southeast corner of Delaware County. So almost monthly now, the mayor of Sunbury, the mayor of Galena, township trustees in Genoa, and Trenton, and Harlem, and Berlin, all get together in a room and we talk. Trying to build trusting relationships so that we understand what's happening in each neck of the woods and how it might relate to us and how we might support it or say, yeah, I don't want to do that. But at least we're having a conversation. And this is essential for our future. So healthy relationships, internally and externally. Fourthly, community, identity, and pride. As I mentioned in the past, this community was an agrarian community. That is, that those 35 families that began this township and then for many years lived in this township lived off the land. Their income and their sustenance came from what they produced on a farm. We don't live off the land. In fact, there are only 3 really big farms in Harlem Township. Most of us live here because we wanted to live in the country, but we work somewhere else. We eat somewhere else. We entertain ourselves somewhere else. And then we come back to Harlem Township because this is where we really like to live, in the country, with this rural aesthetic. However, while we don't have silos on our properties, the danger is that we live in silos. I moved and built a house out here because I didn't want to be able to reach out and touch my neighbor. And I didn't want them looking in my window. However, the danger is I go up my driveway, I open my garage, I pull in my car, I shut my garage, and I don't talk to my neighbor. When I built my house, I confess, I built a screened-in back porch, not a front porch. Well, that communicates something. And it's very different from what previous generations might have wanted to communicate. And so we have to work hard to find those things that we, as siloed members of this community, have in common and that might bind us together. I thought of 3 off the top of my head. We like to eat. Restaurants. Why go outside of Harlem Township to eat when we can build restaurants in Center Village and eat there? I said to Joe Stefanoff in New Albany, I said, Joe, someday people that live in New Albany will get in their car and they'll drive up to Center Village to eat in a 5-star restaurant. Now, we'll see if that happens. I don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime, but it may happen someday. Education. We're vitally concerned about our children's education, our relationship with Big Walnut schools, and thinking for the future about how that community develops and how we are a part of Big Walnut schools. What land in Harlem Township can be a place where new schools are built? How do we deepen our ties there? And how do we draw people into our community because of our schools? New Albany will say that one of the very first priorities they had as they began to grow was quality schools. And that's going to be what attracts people to be here. It has to be our commitment. And then exercise. We'll talk about health and well-being, but a place where we can walk, we can bike, where we have trails that run through our community, where maybe we have a community center, but where we're not going outside of the community to do those things that we want to do inside of the community. We want to be a premier residential community supported by the appropriate commercial and light industrial development. And Dana will talk about what that commercial and industrial development might look like. And then finally, safety and well-being. Adam has talked about our services. Top-notch fire department, absolutely committed to having the best employees and the best equipment. This past Wednesday night, we talked about the growing culture in our community where there's a sense that some of our residents feel unsafe. And we looked at the data, and there's a slight uptick in break-ins and theft in our community. How are we going to respond to that? We need to deepen our relationship to the county sheriff's department, to neighboring safety services. We're attuned to these things and have a holistic mindset. It would be wonderful if people can move into Harlem Township, that is first-time homeowners, and live here throughout generations. They used to do that. Can we develop an infrastructure that allows first, second, and third generation families to stay in the township and not feel compelled to move out? Harlem Township has an incredible opportunity to continue to define its growth and development if we hold on to these 5 strategic priorities that are timeless. Okay. Dana?
Okay. Good morning, I'm Dana McDaniel, and I represent the Office of Economic Development of Delaware County. I've been working with them for a little over a year as a consultant. I have nearly 40 years of local government experience. That shouldn't mean anything to you other than this guy must be kind of old. So, but other than that, I've been around the block a little bit. I'm just really pleased to be part of the Delaware County activities that are going on. And I just have to say this up front. Congratulations on this process. It's not easy, it's not fun necessarily, but to do strategic planning like this is not, and I also consult with our firm with a lot of jurisdictions around Ohio and Michigan. I tell you that a lot of communities fail to do this process. So I just want to congratulate you for doing it. It's a little bit painful, I got it. Been through a few generations of it myself in my own communities I worked in, but it's very well worth it. So thank you. I just want to say thank you for doing that. Of course, I'm a local government geek, so I'm kind of into that sort of thing, so keep that in mind when I talk about that. Now, I apologize for having my back to you a bit because I'm going to look at my own slides and try to stay on point here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what is economic development, why do we do it? We'll talk about strategy around economic development. We'll talk about key partnerships. I'm going to talk a little bit about site readiness, because that's important. I got a couple of things to suggest that you think about when it comes to economic development as you continue through your strategy, okay? So let's just hit some of the basics here. What is economic development? Well, I would say generally, definitionally, it's really about you setting conditions for economic development the way you want it to happen in your community, because this is your decisions, not somebody else's. And I really want to applaud John for his point about who you want to be when you grow up, because that's real. I've been through this myself in a community that was rapidly growing. When I started that community, it had 9,000. When I left there, it had 50,000, so I know what it's like to transition through growth. I'm not suggesting you need to do that. That was the community I worked for, that's what they wanted to be. You get to be what you want it to be, however big or small or whatever, however you want to scale it or not. So, that's fundamentally about economic development in terms of you set those conditions, you make those decisions. But economic development from a practitioner's point of view are these things like business retention. You want to take care of the businesses you have, you want to see them be successful, you need to nurture them. Set the conditions for that, conditions for expanding them, conditions for attracting new businesses. Businesses equal jobs, keep that in mind. We get into this ecosystem of creating businesses through entrepreneurial centers and things like that to help people starting up businesses. Some of the best success we saw in our community was just a gentleman who kind of started in his house in the grocery store that he had and wound up being Cardinal Health. The largest corporation in the state of Ohio was started in our community just with an idea. I always believe that every community has the next Cardinal Health, whether you want it that way or not. But it has a lot of successful business people. By the way, Delaware County, and I say this now that I'm speaking a little bit on economic development, is the healthiest. You have been labeled one of the healthiest counties in the state. Wealthiest, I don't mean any of this arrogantly, but you are, by median income, the wealthiest county in the state. And by the way, you're also the wisest. You're one of the most, if not the most educated county in the state of Ohio. And therefore, one of the fastest growing counties in the state of Ohio, and projected to continue to be for years to come. So anyway, so all of that is important when it comes to creating, attracting, retaining, expanding businesses. Workforce readiness is key. You've got that. We export 70% of our workforce of this county every day. Goes out of the county to work. I'm wearing my economic development hat, right? That's what I'm kind of paid by the county to do. Love to see some of that stay in the county and give them opportunities for jobs to happen here. Not that we have a lot of great jobs happen here, a lot of great businesses in the county, don't get me wrong, but we're exporting 70%. I'll just leave it at that. We do have a workforce readiness group. It's an alliance of the workforce ecosystem in the county, working together to be able to help our companies to attract and develop workers that they need to make their businesses successful. And then, of course, infrastructure is really important, and that ties to site readiness. I'll go into that here in a minute, but it was a great job done earlier. I talked about all the different infrastructure opportunities, capacities, and capabilities that you have as a township. Why do economic development as a jurisdiction? And I just want to emphasize I'm not here representing the county or wearing the county hat to tell you what to do. But economic development is important to your future fiscal sustainability, whether you stay the size you are now or whether you grow or however much you grow. And having business in your community is important. Commercial development, as it's referred to. There's lots. Commercial development is a broad spectrum of things, from small service companies to large corporations. It could be anything in that spectrum that you want it to be, but nonetheless, it's important. It provides a stable tax base. It enhances your quality of life, going to those restaurants, and that sort of thing. And having those local services, be it medical service, whatever, you name it, those things make your life easier because you're not having to commute a long way to do that. So anyway, you also build resistance against these economic cycles when you have a good mix and balance of businesses in your community. It's not that you have to have the largest corporations that are out there in the community, but to have a good balance of those and a diverse economy is a good thing to have. When you talk about fiscal health, the vibrancy of your community, the resilience, you want your businesses and your residents to thrive, and this is all part of that system that we're able to happen. So, again, keep that in the back of your mind as I kind of go through the rest of this. Next slide, please. Thank you. So strategies, strategies are really important, and this list looks like the same thing I just told you, so that's why I put it in there. The strategy for economic development needs to address all these things. Now, when I put influencers, now the only thing I added to that was target industries, because when I mentioned that spectrum of commercial or companies that you could look for and track, like I said, it's pretty broad. But as part of your strategy, and John alluded to this, I believe, you want to target the kind of companies you want to have in your community and their sizes, and you can do this through your zoning processes and working with developers and the like. But nonetheless, you can guide that yourselves, and I encourage you to do that. Now, I put this influencers on here because there's influencers in economic development, and there are many. really what I want to talk about here is the strategies that are out there. And the state of Ohio has economic development strategy. We work closely with the state, Jobs Ohio and the like. We have a regional economic development corporation, which is called One Columbus. Used to be Columbus 2020, recently changed to One Columbus. They have an economic development strategy. The county Office of Economic Development has an economic development strategy adopted in late 2023, and we are out talking about that, promoting that, trying to get alignment to that. Not that all is right for every jurisdiction, but our job in that office is to support jurisdictions, not to tell jurisdictions what to do, but we need to be there to help them when there are these opportunities. I'll talk a little more about that. And then I put the law up there. Why did I do that? I just did that as an example of a local government that's a neighbor that has an economic development strategy. Now, obviously, they have a great partner for them in NACO, New Albany Company, and New Albany's done an amazing job with economic development. They have this international business park, which happens to be over the Little Rock and Hit It here, right? That has a big influence on Harlem, as you know, which is, certainly sparked a lot of this conversation. But what I would say to you is don't necessarily stiff arm that, embrace that, leverage that as an opportunity for yourselves as much as the good that it's doing for New Albany, if you will, and the region and the state for that matter. So the point there is you have a strategy. I would encourage you to think about that as you, continue down the road with this strategy to really maybe drill down even after this process into an economic development strategy. Next slide. This is an eye chart. Sorry about that. But I put this up there because I wanted to just emphasize the point that when doing economic development, there's lots of partners. You need to keep that in mind. You probably learn that through this process, right? Everybody comes to these meetings wondering, well, gee, how's it going to affect me, or what can I leverage, or what have you. So obviously your local government is residents drive the train, so you're not listed on here just because we know who the bosses are, right? So the local government is a partner in those economic development organizations like the state, the county. There's One Columbus. There's other economic development organizations that you can partner with. Chambers of Commerce are great partners. They are really our business retention and expansion partner because they have organizations that bring business together. The workforce development boards, as an example, and that ties in with the colleges, universities, which we are rich in Delaware County to have, and in this region. We also have great school systems. They have to be key partners. Now when we talk about our local school systems, it's not only that they are educating our children, but it's also when we do economic development, we talk about incentives and how things grow, sustainability, we have to keep that partner in mind. Because as you all know, depending on how rapidly you grow with housing, what's the impact on schools? Can you balance that with some of the commercial economic development that can help fund the community and also help fund the schools? There's a key balance to find in that, and that communication needs to happen early and often and regularly with them. You could get into a position where if you choose to do economic development, you might start doing some level of incentives. You gotta be careful how you do that so that you're not affecting the schools negatively, and that takes a partnership. There's give and take in that. So there's a lot to consider there. Financial institutions, the CIC stands for Community Improvement Corporation. We have one in the county. Just had a meeting yesterday about how to grow that. It used to be a very large organization. The county did a lot of great economic development stuff. It kind of faltered over the years, and we're trying to breathe life back into that. We have a port authority in Delaware County of our own, which does financing. It's Delaware County Finance Authority. Does tax-free bonding for public infrastructure related to commercial development. And also we do some other tax exemption stuff that helps companies to invest and grow. And incentives go on and on and on. I'm not going to get into that. I was going to make this a 3-hour lecture on economic development, but I didn't want to do that on Saturday, and it would take that to understand all those tools, right? But just know that those are out there. The nonprofit community-based organizations are critical as well. And of course, those utility providers help enable the opportunity for commercial development. Next slide. Okay, so here's some suggestions to think about. Don't throw anything at me, don't yell at me. But I am wearing my economic development hat. I also have in mind, how does Harlem Township, as I said early on, whether you stay the way you are approach your own fiscal sustainability. We ran some scenarios on 100, 200, and 300 acre business campuses. When I say business campus, I'm using the word business campus broadly because I don't know what you want it to be. I can sit with you and talk about the trends we see, the lead types we see, where I think the market's going these days, what vacancy rates are in the region. I know them by heart. I know what yours are in the county. I know what's possible. I know what's likely not possible. It doesn't mean I have a crystal ball or a lot of data around this stuff. Just so we can have those conversations that we want to have. But my point here is, and there's a long list of assumptions in developing this model, like abatements and how much square footage you can put on 100 acres and what that's worth, and there's a lot of assumptions in here, I'll grant you that. But generally speaking, you can generate revenues to the community by doing economic development. But you have to plan forward on that, you have to work with landowners, work with the development community, and get out there and be aggressive about recruiting what you want to have so that you can set these conditions for these kind of opportunities, okay? So you control that. All right, that is in your area to control. So, anyways, things you want to talk about. Some of the target industries up there, we've heard these from the community a bit. In some of the settings I've been in, and I know that these folks have have been participating in and having. But I can also tell you these tie very closely to the leads that we see. We get leads that come down through Jobs Ohio, through One Columbus, to our office. A lot of local jurisdictions have visibility on them. If you got somebody who can sit and watch them every day. We have people in our office paid every day to watch these. There's been just over the year that I've been here, we've had well over 100 leads come in, representing 14,000 jobs, almost all of which are in these sort of NAICS codes or these industry areas. These are high-tech, light manufacturing, clean manufacturing, high-paying type jobs. They're not smokestack factories. There are a few in there that I wouldn't recommend you do. I would say 90% of them I would recommend our communities pursue. We have attracted 0 of that 14,000. And the reason for that is we don't have the sites ready in the county. So as a result, we're doing a countywide site inventory and assessment on those sites and how we can get those sites ready so we can better compete for these jobs. Now I'll tell you, we did come in a close second on a nearly $4 billion pharmaceutical manufacturing company with 700 employees. Would have been in the city of Delaware. We came in a tight second. That'll get announced in the region here before long. But it was a great exercise because we learned where we had great advantages, and we learned where we have great disadvantages. Okay, but we're narrowing in, right? And so the economic development folks from all the jurisdictions, or if they don't have one, their administrator, we're working collectively together as a county. And I tell you, I had heard before I came here about how a lot of the jurisdictions in the county didn't get along. And this is coming from the economic development world, and I'm telling you, it's not going to be further from the truth. I've been so proud to be interacting with the jurisdictions in this county, and the goodness that they're doing and trying to do these kinds of things, right? So we've got great traction, and we'll be winners too. But I'm just asking that you consider this for yourselves. Let's see, you're 25 square miles, right, thereabouts. How many acres is that? Are you at 16? Did you just do the math that quick? Okay. You already did. So, wow. 16,000 acres. Do you think it would be too hard to give up maybe 600 acres? Not necessarily in one spot, spread out throughout the township to do some economic development. I don't know if it's too much, too little. Maybe it's scalable, maybe it's 50 acres, maybe it's, I don't know. But I'd like you to be thinking about that, right? And whether that's too much, too little, or maybe that's a sweet spot, where should it go? These are the things that we're talking about and trying to set the conditions. But these are the kind of industries I would recommend, and we're actually recommending countywide to be pursued. That does not take away medical, doesn't take away office, doesn't take away retail, doesn't take away those things, but these are the kinds of industries that if you're going to do this, these are the kinds that you want to consider. As others will follow the market as need be, for the most part, and they will happen to some level. but these are the ones you want to target. Next, okay. I just want to speak to ready sites. So if you choose to go down that road, to some respect, and I suspect you'll have landowners or developers who will want you to go down that road and ask you to go down that road with them. These are things you need to consider, and I'm not sure why zoning and land use, that's supposed to be in the same size font as everything else. We're not trying to de-emphasize zoning. It's not as split. So anyway, zoning and land use, this is the checklist. If you're going to attract things, you must be ready, and it has to have all these things. And that's what we're working on countywide to try to make sure the sites with jurisdictions want that to happen, meet these requirements. It's a heavy lift. It's a challenge, but that's what we're working on. I put speed and predictability at the bottom because that's how you compete with other communities. If you can get this checklist in place around certain sites, then speed and predictability helps the community development community, helps the business who wants to be there, and that's critical to have, okay? So just keep that on the next slide. I couldn't help myself, but I noticed there was talk about the center village concept. And I'm not gonna say whether that's good or bad or indifferent, it's just if you wanna do it, and you wanna have a center village of some density, it can be 10 acres, 20 acres, 50 acres. Think about our old city centers or village centers of the past. Think about, I don't know, think about downtown Delaware, think about downtown Marysville, just trying to name something you might be familiar with. Some of us probably grew up in those communities. I grew up in Southwest Ohio. We have a little downtown, I could ride my bike to it. Tried to stay out of the pool hall at the age of 13, but I used to ride my bike there. I'm not saying those are bad to have. My point is, these centers like this, communities are gravitating back to those. It's obvious. You can't go to an economic development seminar that they don't talk about these mixed-use centers and the importance of them, okay? It does create all those social things that have been talked about, but from a development, economic development perspective, this is my perspective on that. The new worker wants to be associated with that. If you're gonna pursue office in your economic development strategy, you better have something like this. The days of the office park are dead and gone, okay? Plus there's so much vacancy in those now in the region, and the rents are so low, you're not gonna be able to compete with that. So to have those in a dynamic environment like this is critical if you think you're gonna attract that. So I just toss that out there for consideration. It meets the modern expectations of work life and integration. It also is a support to those business parks I was talking about. So they want to have that interaction and proximity to those things. They may not want it in that office park for the kinds of uses that are there, but they need, those support services close by. So you got to think a little bit about what we call mixed use when you're setting these things up. But I hate that word, to be honest with you, because mixed use means a lot of things to a lot of different people. And there's a lot of different folks who like to use mixed use as an excuse to do one thing, and it's not really mixed use. So anyway, so that's the world according to me. Don't meet me up in the parking lot after this. I'll be available for any questions, comments you have after this, but just wanted to give a little perspective on economic development. Thanks.
Thank you, Dana. So I am Holly Maddie with Crossroads Community Planning, and I get the opportunity today to talk to you about the strategic recommendations coming out of this plan. And I just want to thank everyone here today, from the committee, steering committee, to the trustees, to the residents who have participated in this process, because it has really been one of the best things that I've been through. I really love seeing the leadership and the community come together in what was a turmoil point to get to where we are today. So appreciate that. As we move forward with the recommendations, they are towards the back of the plan. Hopefully everyone here has had an opportunity to get on the township website and read the draft plan. The recommendations are in the back in a matrix, and they are separated into the different strategic priorities. And then within those strategic priorities, there are recommendations, and each recommendation has action items associated with it, who's responsible for implementing those actions, and then a time frame for each of those action items. Time frames range from short term being 0 to 1 year, medium, midterm, 1 to 3 years, or long term, 3+ years. And then we also have a category called ongoing. Those are things that you should be doing now and just continue on into the future, working on those items. So let's dig a little bit into these recommendations. Up on the screen under distinct, connected, and rooted are the larger bullet points or the larger recommendations that are coming out of the plan. And then we have more specific action items under those. So for example, protect the township lifestyle. We all know that what you see out your window today, you want to continue to see, and we may not be able to see that exactly how it is today, but how can we make it as close or similar and reflect this lifestyle that you have today? And so a couple of things that we have recommended through here is supporting hobby farms, supporting those that maybe have a bee honey area, farming bees, maybe having some other smaller type farming activity on their community. So supporting those and continuing to allow those as the land develops outward. Another larger thing that we looked at from the committee level, and we talked through it a lot, it came out of the field trips that the committee members took, and that is developing what we're referring to as an agri-community. And you'll see up on your slide an example. It's called Alberlin Springs, and it is located outside of Lebanon, Ohio. You actually get off Interstate 71, you turn left, and you go by a Target, and you think you're in the middle of a suburb. You drive, you turn left again, you drive north from there, and it just turns into this rural-esque view with trees on each side, and you do not realize there's a Target less than a mile behind you. And as you get out there, you will see this development is actually a custom home builder that worked closely with someone who had a vision to have a working farm agri-community. And the custom builder has built both single-family houses as well as condos, and it is all centered around a working farm. And there are animals, there's plants, there's a greenhouse, there are pathways that connect. So is this everywhere in the township? No, but we have found what we believe is a particular place that this could happen. And so we are recommending that the township look towards implementing something along this lines. And I think the committee members really did like this. Out of all of the field trips they took, this was one of the ones that rose to the top, which is why we really focused on making sure we had a place to put that in the community. Enhancing regional recreational connectivity, making sure that we have paths connecting our community from Center Village to residential areas into the rest of the region. There are expansive park systems from metro parks to Delaware County Preservation Parks to your own individual township park just south of Center Village. How do we connect those so that folks can get on their bikes or walk and not have to get in their car to get to these places? And especially as we talk about a village center, how can we make sure that people can get there in a walkable manner? And then moving on to aligning zoning with a strategic vision. We touched on it, John touched on it previously, that we were in a very reactive mode several years ago. There was a lot of things coming at Harlem Township. And as a result, there was a lot of reaction happening. So there are overlay districts that are in place in a reactive way. So taking a look at the overlay districts, reevaluating them, are there things that we can do to be more of a proactive way? They served a purpose because they did help establish that, hey, we want to remain Harlem Township, But now that these relationships with our adjacent neighbors have developed, we don't have to be as reactive. We can be more proactive, and we can be who Harlem Township wants to be. So evaluating those, are there different housing types? Are there different things that we can include within those overlay districts to help define who you are? Also being proactive, shifting not only from overlay districts to what I call legislative PUDs. And I think targeting those towards the interior of the township is an area where you can start to see master planning going on. So where developers will have a vision for larger areas, maybe an agri-community, maybe it's a business community that Dana touched on, but larger tracts of land where landowners are coming together and where they're planning that out to create that connectivity and to make sure that when those developers approach the township to develop and create their own zoning text through these legislative PUDs, that all of that is reflected in your zoning, that they are rooted, they're connected, and that they're distinct. So making sure that those zoning codes reflect those values, and then when they come in as developers and they write their own zoning text within the PUDs, that the zoning commission and the trustees have a basis to make sure we're connecting back to these priorities. We believe all of this will help secure the strategic independence of the township. The zoning really, really helps in making sure you have your independence. These partnerships with surrounding communities that we heard being talked about with Columbus, New Albany, Galena, those are going to protect you and make sure that you stay the township that you want to be. Expanding the governance options, you heard Adam talk about that. There's a recommendation that the township explore limited home rule government. And that conversation has already started. But making sure that that continues and to see what benefits and other things that can come out of being limited home rule. And then protecting and enhancing open space. We are recommending that the township create an open space working group. I believe that you should have different entities on that board, from a trustee representative, from a zoning perspective, from a resident perspective, from a business owner perspective, having metro parks at the table, having preservation parks at the table. And I will tell you that we had 2 recent conversations with both metro parks and preservation parks. Wonderful conversations. They are willing to come to the table and work with you on identifying those areas that could be preserved as parkland, and then how to connect them through your township. So if we could go to the next slide. The next slide is intentional growth and development. So leveraging your strategic economic development tools, continue the conversations with your neighbors, making sure that we are directing growth to areas that are strategically identified for them. So what we did with the steering committee was we started out with a blank map of the township. I shouldn't say it was blank, but just a township map of what it is today. And then having key parcels that are identified as key current agricultural businesses, key horse farms, and then looking at the infrastructure that's already in place today. So the existing electric line, where the sewer is coming in, and then where are your cemeteries, and all those different key features. So we had all of that laid out on a map, and then we worked with the steering committee to identify where can we target some of these different uses that we're talking about, the agri-community, a business park, a center village. And we were able to come up with this future land use map that you see on your map. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail in the next slide. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about the rest of these bullet points. So expanding housing diversity. So maybe looking at different types of housing that maybe hasn't been on the radar screen for the township, but that will help support that multi-generational community that we've been talking about here today. So maybe looking at things like ADUs and other ways to age in place. And then fostering a local economic system. So looking at maybe including more detail about agritourism within your zoning code. How can we promote and sustain agritourism to bring people to the farm, to bring people to the agricultural areas where they can learn and be part of that process. And again, that goes back to that agri-community. And then also fostering small business growth and how we connect those small businesses to the resources they need, whether it's through Delaware County Economic Development, through the Chamber, through all of the different entities that the county and the region have to help a small business. And small business is really being targeted towards that village center area. And then we also recommend under this section that the township develop a community improvement corporation, which is known as a CIC. It is a quasi-independent board or entity that can be utilized to help purchase and sell and protect and develop land. And I say protect and develop because money can be generated and put into that CIC. They can utilize that money to purchase land for long-term preservation. Or it could also be used to purchase land to target for economic development purposes. So having your strategic priorities in place and creating a board like that allows the community to strategically identify where they want that growth and where they want the preservation, and utilize the funding from your other economic development tools, your JEDs and your NCAs, to help funnel money into that entity to help spur those preservation and growth areas. And then you can go to the next slide, which is the future land use map that I was talking about. So on this future land use map, we left the overlay districts shown around the boundaries of the area of the township. We do discuss about how reevaluating them and maybe they don't need to be changed, but looking at them and is there anything that needs to be changed based upon the priorities that we've set in this plan going forward. Then we have actually identified one of the 300-acre business parks that Dana spoke about. And you'll see that in the southwest corner of the township, just northeast of the Harlem Road intersection. And it's shown in like a salmon type color there, a pinkish color. And that is an area where the sewer is coming. It's going to be at that corner in the next couple of years. And it is an area that could connect easily, spur some economic development, especially with the partnership with Columbus and a joint economic development district, generating funds immediately to assist with other community infrastructure that is needed to help make sure this township is growing responsibly and effectively. And then we also have identified the Center Village area, which is a slightly different color, pink, and you'll see within that Center Village area, we've identified places for senior housing, for park areas, for a potential school site. Not that it's actually going to necessarily be right in that area, but the committee said, isn't it nice that we have Souders Elementary on one side? Couldn't we have a middle school or a high school on the other side and create bookends of schools? So just our ideas, we'd have to obviously work with the school district. There obviously has to be a need for that, and there's going to be a need, but there has to be land for that, etc. So making sure though that conceptually this is our idea, and this is where we think it would be a great place for it. And then also up to that northeast area of Center Village, some additional areas for senior housing and other types of housing to support and that would be more walkable into that village center area. And then I want to focus off to your left-hand side where the letter A is. That is the area that the committee identified as the agri-community. There is an existing golf course there. There are some existing agricultural easements or conservation easements in that area. And they said, isn't that a great place to really build on the agriculture that's there today, the easements that are in place, and with golf courses, we've seen a lot of golf courses redevelop over the last several years. Not that anyone has heard that this one would, but because of the trends we've seen in other places, is this an area that might be redeveloped? And if it was redeveloped, wouldn't that fit nicely into that green space of creating that agri-community? So that was the committee's idea to put that there. And then, as we mentioned, along the north side of the township, along Trenton Road, is one of the overlay districts to help accommodate and support anything coming from the north out of Sunbury. The green area basically is underneath, south of the Center Village and north of Fancher, is all cluster residential, and what we're recommending in that area as a committee is that that overlay continue, but that developers could also pursue rezonings to other PUDs to protect specific green space areas in there and create a little higher density pockets in key locations when it made sense when they were protecting large tree stands, etc. So that would be a process they would have to go through and negotiate. It wouldn't be an overlay that just is an automatic pull down from the clouds. So just making sure that those critical resources are protected as development moves forward. And then if we go into the next slide. So the next one is maintaining healthy and internal and external relationships, expanding resident engagement. One of the things that came out of the steering committee was that there was concern about developers meeting with the township or landowners meeting with the township and the residents not understanding where all of those conversations are happening. So the recommendation is to create a list of all major meetings that have been attended by trustees or the township, and have that available at each of the trustees' meetings so they can say, we attended these meetings. The trustees are really good about reporting out at the meetings, but just having a list available and maybe even on the website as well. Retaining strong relationship with the township employees. We're recommending that establish regular all-staff meetings and even quarterly retreats with leadership. And then regional collaboration, continue to monitor surrounding communities and planning initiatives and zoning. We've been doing that with Columbus, with New Albany, with Galena. The steering committee wanted to make sure that we were not forgetting about Johnstown to our east, and making sure that every community is being monitored and included in that review. And then engaging strategic landowners. Again, that goes back to, should the township be doing that? And I think we had a very robust conversation about that at one of our steering committee meetings. And the steering committee finally came out and said, yes, there was some dissent from one or two people, but overall the committee was like, yes, we need to be talking to those landowners. We have to understand their intent. And if we don't understand their intent, then we can't properly plan. So that's where that created the list of meetings came out of for that as well. And then strengthen infrastructure and county level coordination. I loved John's saying of, we'll call you, don't call us, but I think that's changing. We need to have that two-way communication from not only at the county, but all of our regional partners. And one of the things that we are recommending coming out of here is that the Harlem Township creates a technical review committee. You often see that in municipalities, and you see that at the county level, but having that at the township level would be extremely helpful when development happens. And what that is that when a development's proposed, there's a meeting that takes place with the fire department, with the public safety, with your zoning inspector, with your economic development arm, with your planning staff. And maybe you don't have all of those entities today, and though maybe as you expand, you'll have more of those staffing levels, and as you grow, the importance of bringing them all together to have a common conversation is extremely important. Bringing the county engineer, the soil and water district, any entity that's going to have any regulation or discussion point on that development needs to be at the table together to make sure that it's being implemented with Harlem Township's intentions and priorities. So going to the next slide. Community pride. We talked a lot about Village Center. I'm not going to go into a lot more detail. I think the others have explained that very well, and I think it's something that we've seen over the last several years that everyone agrees on with the Village Center. As far as branding, the township is, we're recommending branding. The township's already taken that action, working with Cryo Communications, and I want to thank Cryo Communications as well. They helped at the beginning of this process with communication efforts with the strategic plan, and they've since been retained also by the township to help with the branding of the community. So that is something that's started and will continue forward. Partnering with heritage organizations, such as the Heritage Association, and making sure that we lean into their expertise and their cultural and historic knowledge of the community to make sure that as the community develops, that those are not forgotten things, that we're recognizing the heritage. Support revitalization of the Village Center, and then implement heritage standards. This again is creating distinct aesthetic standards that differentiate Harlem Township from the rest of the region, and maybe even creating an architectural review board, which townships can do, to help ensure that development is reflecting the character that you desire. And then the next is my last slide, which is safety and well-being, making sure that we're scaling public services. There are a lot of recommendations that the fire chief was able to assist us on with that, and we heard that, working with public safety as far as police services and what is that critical point of when we need to do something different with police services. So I'm making sure that's on the radar screen, and that there's key things that the township's looking at. Making sure that there is a capital improvement plan in place, so that roads and maintenance operations and building operations and building needs are not neglected, that you know what those capital improvements are needed for your buildings and roads, and that you're planning for those for the next 5+ years out, and have a rotating schedule for maintenance of those facilities. Creating a safe transportation network, looking at it from not only cars, but what is that multimodal approach to your transportation. And then again, planning for township facilities and personnel expansion. So one of the hardest things that I think communities have to tackle with, of when do we need a new fire station? When do we need a new administration building? When do we need a township administrator? When do we need a full-time planning staff? When do we need a full-time economic developer? So we've provided some information in the plan regarding bits and pieces of that, but we also recommend that a full-blown facility and staffing plan be pursued by the township as you move forward, to know as you grow when those things are needed. So with that, I did not hit on every recommendation. When we're finished, there are boards around here, and I'll explain that later, that have all the recommendations, but those are just the highlights that I wanted to cover in this presentation. And I'm going to turn it over to Chris Hermann with MKSK to close us out here.
Thank you, Holly. Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Hermann. I want to thank you all for sitting here patiently while we've been sharing all this information. I'm the last speaker, and I will try to keep this very short. Who am I? Why do you care? I am a planner with about 30 plus years of experience. I work on advising communities around Central Ohio, around Ohio, actually Midwest. And so I was actually invited here to speak to Harlem Township at the end of June in 2024. And this was actually in this room, and almost every seat was full. And Harlem Township was clearly at a critical decision point. And I just was invited here to share my thoughts, having no skin in the game other than observations and relationships, and having gone through this in a number of other places. And I'm so glad to see, the progress, where you've come actually in that short amount of time. You've really come together as a community. You've had critical conversations. I really encourage you, it's so great to see that you had dialogue with the surrounding communities. I think at the time there was a perception that Columbus or New Albany, there was some big bag of gorilla that was coming. Having worked and having knowledge of a lot of leadership in those places, I knew that wasn't really accurate. So it's great you shared what you were trying to do here. They got to share what they're trying to achieve, and it sounds like you've had a lot of productive conversations. I think it's leading in the right place. This strategic plan is very well done. It sounds like you've had a lot of good conversations. I love the themes that you all come up with, the principles. I think do authentically reflect, at least my perception of who all, Harlem Township is and what you are trying to achieve. I agree with the trends. I think that's really important. I think really one of the biggest things is having all of you come to grips with where you are and what the situation is today. Basically, you are in a growing region. The reservoir, in some sense, has really insulated you for a period of time, but the growth has now gotten so big that you all are getting into that crosshairs. You're in the crosshairs. Why does it matter? Growth means everyone's looking for where to put the next thing. Being industrial, employment, housing. It's all things that we need with this growth. And they're looking for undeveloped areas, single ownership, places with lots of utility services. And so where utilities and infrastructure improvements go is where the development starts following. And you now are seeing the electric improvements, the sanitary sewer improvements, the water improvements, the road improvements. All those things are done from a regional scale, but because they're coming through you, around you, development's gonna follow through that. And so, as you've already heard today, this is about not saying no to development because that's just gonna cause problems. I'm gonna tell you right now, it ultimately ends up meaning you get run over. It's about saying, all right, we understand development is going to happen, but we want to guide it to help where we want to get to. That's the key place to get to. It seems like you've gotten there. That's what this plan reflects. I think it's a really important realization. So why was Dana talking to you about economic development? Why is that important? Because you need to guide the growth in a way that doesn't become an extra burden on you, particularly from a financial point of view. As development happens, as this infrastructure has to get paid off, Delaware as an entire county has become heavily residential. And the county understands that. What happens when that happens is the tax burden falls more and more onto the residents. And economic development is a way to shift that back so that it's the businesses and it's the employment that's helping shoulder more of that burden and the new growth. And so it's critically important Delaware's understand it. Dana's helping Delaware and others are helping Delaware understand this, that we've got to do things as a county to attract that employment because that helps rebalance the fiscal impacts of this growth and development that's happening. And that is also now true for Harlem Township. You need to be ahead of it. You need to be thinking about it. There are tools that allow you to capture the new growth impact so that it's not existing residents that are paying for that. That's the new community authorities that's in this plan. There's things like the JEDs, the CEDAs. There are ways of capturing the value, the property tax values of new development, again, to help offset these costs so that they aren't all falling on you. So it's the new development, the new residents are helping to pay These are all things that are really important. That's why planning ahead and being in front of this is so important. And so it's great to see that you've done this. I think the plan is very well put together. I want to congratulate the whole team that's done this, the trustees, Holly and her firm, all of you, in really coming to this point. One of the things in the forward that really caught my eye, the trustees basically say, you know, it's great we're doing this plan, but planning doesn't end. And I know you don't want to hear that. You should be congratulated on where you are today, but the reality is you need to keep, my message to you is you need to stay in front of this and keep guiding it. You can't just say, oh, we're done, and then hope everything works out. You need to continue to get in front of this, continue to have these conversations with partners, continue to have these conversations with the large landowners that are really critical in your township, because they have the right to sell, and when and how they sell affects things. So having those conversations, I think conversations about what you want to see and helping to guide that growth, all really important. It's an ongoing conversation. Please continue to stay involved. But as an outside looking in, not invested in this process other than just wanting to see the best for all of you, I think it's a well done plan. And we'll turn back to Holly, but happy to answer any questions when we're done here.
Great, so the way this is gonna work is we are going to release you, and we have around the room several boards. And so starting over here on the left-hand side is the future land use map. And then as you move over are all the strategic priorities and recommendations are all along the back wall. And these are all just the strategic priorities and goals up here. So actually you could probably start, if you want to follow the plan order, you would start here and work this way. But you can welcome to move about any way you want to move. We are all going to be stationed around here so that we can answer questions for you and talk with you one-on-one. And then there are also sticky notes and pens. And so everybody gets to participate. Everybody gets to say, I like this, I don't like this, or I have a question about this. So you would write your concern or your affirmation of something and stick it up on the board. And then if you have a question, we'll be stationed there to help answer it for you. So with that, I am going to release you guys, and thank you all for coming. We would not be here today without all of you, so thank you so much.